stand up for American workers and say, no, trade is a good thing, but it has to be based on principles that protect ordinary Americans, working people, not just the CEOs of large corporations. With that, Mr. President, I would yield the floor.
The Senator from Maine.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I rise today in the wake of another very sobering jobs report. Unemployment remains stalled at 9.1%. 14 million Americans are out of work. Another 9 million have been forced into part-time jobs because they simply cannot find full-time employment. These challenging economic times demand that Congress and the administration put aside partisanship and work together in earnest to address the prolonged jobs crisis. Many of the decisions that will come before Congress in the next few months will be difficult ones, including those that must be made to restore fiscal order to our nation's books. But there are bipartisan measures that we know will create and preserve jobs now. We must work together to advance them. One such measure before us today is the free trade agreement with South Korea. As President Obama stated last week, this agreement will make it easier for American companies to sell their products in South Korea and provide a major boost to our exports. South Korea is our country's 7th largest trading partner. The U.S. International Trade Commission estimates that implementation of this agreement would increase our gross domestic product by $10 to $12 billion and annual merchandise exports by $10 billion. The ITC further estimates that the agreement will reduce the U.S. trade deficit with Korea by between $3 billion and $4 billion. An analysis of the Korean agreement conducted by the staff of the ITC at the request of the Senate Finance Committee concludes that the agreement could create up to 280,000 American jobs, including more than 650 jobs in my home state of Maine. Mr. President, just this week, there were announcements of 130 jobs lost at a paper mill in Maine and 65 jobs eliminated at a call center. So these new jobs, potentially 650 new jobs, would be welcome indeed. South Korea is the 5th largest international market for Maine products. Last year, the value of Maine exports to South Korea reached nearly $100 million, including $31 million in chemical products, $29 million in wood pulp, $15 million in civilian aircraft and engine parts, $7 million in electrical machinery, and $5 million in coated paper and paperboard. Upon implementation of the U.S.-Korean Free Trade Agreement, more than 95% of Maine's exports to South Korea would be duty-free. Let me repeat that. 95% of our exports from Maine to South Korea would be duty-free. That means that the elimination of these barriers to Maine's exports would expand markets for Maine's manufacturers and agricultural producers. And that, Mr. President, translates into saving jobs and creating jobs. Korea is the fourth largest and fastest growing market for American frozen potatoes, a major industry in my state. In 2009, the U.S. share of the Korean market was 81% compared to 2% market share for the European Union. But with the implementation of the European Union-Korean trade agreement this past July, the European Union frozen potatoes now enter the Korean market duty-free. That obviously gives European Union growers a significant competitive advantage over American exporters who face an 18% tariff for shipping their products into Korea. The U.S.-Korean agreement would eliminate this tariff immediately, leveling the playing field for our producers. According to the Maine Potato Board, which has endorsed this agreement, passage of this free trade agreement is expected to translate into a $35 million annual increase in U.S. frozen potato exports to Korea. More important, in the long term, it will allow American potatoes to be the product of choice in the Korean market because, as the presiding officer well knows, Maine potatoes taste better than those grown by the European Union countries. In all seriousness, we do need to eliminate these discrepancies in tariffs that give our competitors an advantage over our American producers. Exports are essential to a strong industrial manufacturing base throughout our country and in the state of Maine. I want to read an excerpt from a letter that I recently received from the plant manager of the General Electric energy plant in Bangor, Maine. The plant manager had this to say about the potential impact if this free trade agreement were approved. He wrote as follows: GE's continuing ability to pursue expanding international opportunities for our aviation, energy, and financial services exports is critical to our more than 700 workers in the state of Maine. In fact, 100% of the new steam turbine units coming out of our Bangor plant this year and next will be exported. That just shows how critical that export market is to maintaining those 700 jobs in Maine. The Bangor plant has, in addition, recently started producing components for gas turbines. To this end, we have invested roughly $30 million in Bangor to expand capacity. These gas turbines, under current law, face tariffs of 8% in Korea. If the U.S.-Korean free trade agreement is passed, the GE plant manager in Bangor told me that the tariff on the gas turbines produced at the Bangor plant would drop from 8% to 0. And that obviously would make those GE products and GE's employees in Maine all that much more competitive. For Maine's wood pulp producers, Korea is already the second largest international market that they have. Exports to Korea account for nearly 17% of the total production coming out of the pulp mill in Woodland, Maine. In an email to my office, Bert Martin, a director of the pulp mill in Washington County, had this to say about the importance of the Korean market to his business operation in Maine. He wrote, "Free trade with Asian countries means that we have an operating pulp facility in Woodland, Maine. Koreans are good-paying customers, high revenue, and they are an important part of our markets. Maine's blueberry growers also will benefit from the phase-out of tariffs on wild blueberry products. While I would have preferred to see the tariffs on blueberries eliminated immediately, the way that they are many other products that I've mentioned, the tariff reductions that would come about as a result of this agreement will help our blueberry growers compete in an increasingly important market. This agreement will also unlock new market opportunities for Maine's iconic lobster industry. Live lobster exports to Korea currently face a 20% tariff. Under the agreement, this tariff would be phased out over 5 years, making it far easier for Maine to compete in the marketplace in Korea. Fairchild Semiconductor in Portland, Maine, is another strong supporter of this agreement. The manager of Fairchild cites the benefits of tariff elimination, regulatory improvements, stronger intellectual property protection, and simplified trade clearance procedures, measures that will help streamline customs procedures and help U.S. companies cut down on the costs of doing business as advantages that would be brought about by this agreement. Mr. President, the bottom line is that exports to Korea support Maine jobs. Passage of this agreement is critical to ensuring not only that we can expand export opportunities, but also that we do not lose market share in one of the world's largest economies because our foreign competitors are more aggressive in their pursuit of trade liberalization agreements. On balance, I believe that the U.S.-Korean Free Trade Agreement is good for America and good for the state of Maine, and I will vote for it. I am convinced that the elimination of tariffs will create jobs and help us save jobs at this critical time in our economy. I also plan to vote for the agreement with Panama, a country with which the United States had a $5.7 billion trade surplus last year. But, Mr. President, I cannot support the free trade agreement with Colombia. This was a difficult decision for me to reach, and I've given it considerable study and thought. But unfortunately, the violence against labor unions continues at an unacceptably high rate in that country. I do appreciate and recognize that the Colombian government has taken steps to improve in this area, but I think that it's simply too soon to declare the Labor Action Plan a success. I think more time is needed to assess progress in this area, and I wish that the President had brought forth the two agreements that I can support, those with South Korea and Panama, and held back on the Colombian agreement until we had a better sense of the direction of the country and where we are going in making progress with the Labor Action Plan. Mr. President, the benefits of free trade are not spread evenly over all sectors. And with any trade agreement, there is a potential that some U.S. workers and industries may be harmed. That is why I've looked at each agreement individually over the years, and I've supported some and I've opposed others, and frankly, the criteria that I apply are whether the agreements benefit the people of my state and the workers of this country. It is also why I have been such a strong supporter of a robust trade adjustment assistance program, and I have also strongly supported tough enforcement of trade laws to protect U.S. workers against unfair trade practices. I've testified before the ITC in cases involving the paper industry where there has been illegal dumping. I've also been a co-sponsor of the bill that we just passed yesterday to crack down on currency manipulation by the Chinese government. But if the United States does not adopt policies to expand trade opportunities in a fair way, we will lose out on market opportunities, and that means we will lose out on the creation of jobs. The jobs that would be created or sustained here at home will instead be created and sustained in other countries that are aggressively pursuing trade agreements. With nearly 95% of the world's customers living outside of our borders, we simply must seize opportunities to expand our exports, to look for new markets for our products. Our competitors in Europe, Canada, and other nations are actively working to tear down barriers to trade and promote their exports. We must do the same for our industries and for our workers. Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, seeing no one seeking recognition, I would suggest the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka. So the Senate continues to debate the trade agreements with Panama, Colombia, and South Korea. Both the House and the Senate are expected to pass the measures today before South Korean President Lee Myung-bak addresses a joint meeting of Congress tomorrow. Right now, the House is voting on the first of the three trade agreements, the one with Colombia. Still to come in the House this evening, the trade agreements for Panama and South Korea. And then later on tonight, the Senate is expected to take up and vote on all three of those agreements. The National Journal writes that the deals are being considered under the Trade Promotion Authority rules, which prohibit any changes or amendments to the bill, and that the rules also allow both chambers to consider the bill simultaneously, and that each bill requires just a simple majority to pass. We spoke with a reporter today about those trade bills.
Needham of the Hill, why did it take nearly 5 years for these trade agreements to make it to Congress for approval?
Well, when the Bush administration finished these agreements, the Democrats were in control of both houses of Congress, and they said they would not take up the deals. During the Obama administration, they've tweaked the deals and finished most of them. Actually, they finished all of them by the spring, from December into about April. They had them all ready to go. But since then, there was some debate among the Congress and the White House about how to best get them passed, and there was also a program called Trade Adjustment Assistance that the White House wanted included, and it took several months to get an agreement to get these deals up to Capitol Hill.
You mentioned the administration tweaking the deals, but what spurred the administration to push these through for approval?
Well, they certainly have said that they expect that these deals will create jobs, and certainly the economy has been stagnating for the past few months and not creating the necessary number of jobs to bring down the unemployment rate. So that's really been the catalyst behind pushing these along. In addition, a majority of Republicans, and it appears a fair number of Democrats, also agree with these changes that were made to the South Korean deal to help U.S. automakers, to ensure that some areas that Panama is not considered it's considered a tax haven, that there were laws changed. So they've sort of made these changes to appeal a little bit more to Democrats, and they obviously have support of Republicans. So now they're moving this through as part of a jobs package.
Supporters saying it will increase jobs, but opponents saying, particularly on the South Korean deal, that it will decrease jobs. Who's in the right here?
Well, that's a big question, and I guess we'll sort of have to see down the road. Certainly, a lot of labor unions oppose the deals altogether. The UAW up in Michigan, from what I've seen, has been pretty supportive of the changes that were made to try to get automobiles over to Korea. So, what the body of evidence is right now is the NAFTA deals that were the NAFTA deal that was passed in the 90s, and unions and opponents have used various figures to show that the trade deficit did increase over that time, and the U.S. lost jobs. And now we'll just have to see really what happens down the road.
What is it about the Colombia trade deal that makes it seem more controversial than the others?
Well, the Colombia trade deal is the biggest issue has been over labor rights there. The administration and the Colombian government came to an agreement over what's called a labor action plan. What that's supposed to do is provide greater protections for labor activists. It's also supposed to ramp up punishment for those who do acts of violence against labor leaders or workers. It gives workers the right to organize. Well, most Democrats, and you'll probably see that tonight in the House, that many Democrats will vote against that deal because they just don't think that the wording in the agreement is strong enough. The labor action plan is not linked to the trade deal, so they just don't think that it provides enough enforcement from the U.S. side if Colombia does any kind of reneging. Now, President Obama and U.S. Trade Representative Ron Kirk have both assured Democrats that no deal will go into force until Colombia has fulfilled that labor action plan.
Is there significant enough an opposition in either the House or Senate to prevent any of these three agreements from being passed today?
It doesn't appear so right now. It appears that there seems to be, and just listening to debate, that there are certainly a majority of Republicans. We'll have to see which way some of the freshman Republicans vote. But it appears that there are certainly enough Democrats to pass these bills and move them very quickly to the Senate and to clear them tonight.
Read Vicki Needham's work at thehill.com. Thank you for that reporting.
Thank you very much.
So the pending business here in the Senate, those trade agreements with Panama, Colombia, and South Korea. Just a couple of minutes ago, the House approved the trade agreement for Colombia, 262 to 167. The House now voting on the trade agreement, the free trade agreement for Panama, and up next, the trade agreement for South Korea. The Senate is expected to vote on all three of those pieces of legislation this evening. The South Korean president is in Washington to give final approval of the trade deal for his country. President Lee Myung-bak will address a joint session of Congress tomorrow at 4 p.m. Eastern. Our live coverage is on C-SPAN. And tomorrow night we'll have live coverage of the White House State Dinner, including guest arrivals and toasts. We'll have that live on C-SPAN 3 and cspan.org starting at 6:30 p.m. Eastern.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I know we'll soon be voting on these trade agreements, but I have an issue that I think has immediacy in nature and needs to be brought up now. It's something I've been pursuing for some time. Mr. President, we have heard FBI evidence of an alleged plot by Iran and its elite Quds force to assassinate a foreign diplomat on U.S. soil, an extraordinary act of international terrorism that demands, at a minimum, immediate enactment of the most robust sanctions against Iran possible. Were it not for the vigilance of the American intelligence community, the FBI, and all of our law enforcement and intelligence agencies working together, this plot could have not only taken the life of Saudi Arabia's ambassador to the United States, but potentially hundreds of innocent Americans here in Washington. Think of the Machiavellianism of taking out the Saudi ambassador at a downtown Washington restaurant and what that would mean in terms of lives lost and the inevitable response it would provoke from the Saudis and from the United States. In the coming weeks, we will hear the exact details of this incredible plot and the extent of the involvement of members of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. We know the Revolutionary Guard in Iran is at the highest levels of the Iranian government. That is why I specifically targeted the Revolutionary Guard in the Iran sanctions law that is now law. The new legislation I call on my colleagues to support, that now has 76 bipartisan co-sponsors, will consolidate our original sanctions law. Mr. President, Iran's actions demand that we move this legislation in the Congress as we simultaneously go to the United Nations, to the international community, and bring to bear whatever pressure we can to convince the Chinese and the Russians to agree to tighter sanctions against Iran. The fact is, clearly, we must do all that we can to end Iran's exportation of terrorism, which has already taken lives around the globe from Lebanon to Argentina, is responsible for attacks on coalition forces and our own soldiers in Iraq, and now threatens innocent Americans in our nation's capital. I, for one, am not shocked at the revelations we have heard in the last 24 hours. I have known what this regime is capable of, what it intends, and what it will do to achieve its goals. The time has come for this Congress to take the first step in responding to this egregious plot to conduct an assassination in a downtown Washington restaurant. Since I took federal office in 1993, then in the House of Representatives, I have raised for some time this issue of Iran and its ambitions. I have vociferously and passionately advocated on my concern on behalf of the Jewish people and the State of Israel to protect it from the threat of a radical Iranian regime. Now that threat has been directed here towards American soil, where even American citizens could have died in a plot that defies the imagination in its brashness, boldness, and irrationality. So, Mr. President, what specifically do we do? Our first act must be to immediately respond with tougher sanctions that isolate Iran politically and economically, sanctions that will freeze the assets of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps members and allies and shut down the IRGC's sources of revenue, expedite the imposition of sanctions, force companies to decide whether they want to do business with the United States or Iran, and ensure that the United States is an Iranian oil-free zone by banning imports of refined petroleum made with Iranian crude. To that end, along with Senators Lieberman and Kyle, Gillibrand, Casey, Kirk, and Collins, we've introduced in the Senate the Iran, North Korea, and Syria Sanctions Consolidation Act of 2011. It's a bill that recognizes that if Iran's principal goal is to acquire weapons of mass destruction and apparently conduct brazen attacks on American soil against international officials, then it must be the policy of the United States to prevent the Islamic Republic of Iran from acquiring the capability to threaten its neighbors and to threaten nations around the world. The time has come to take that first step and move this legislation. This legislation closes the remaining loopholes in our sanctions policy. In essence, it is perfecting the sanctions policy on the CISADA that we helped pass here in the Senate. It insists on a comprehensive diplomatic initiative within the United Nations to qualitatively expand the UN Security Council sanctions regime against Iran so that Iran cannot find a financial safe harbor or a willing partner anywhere in the world. It imposes immigration restrictions on senior officials from Iran, North Korea, and Syria and their associates who seek to enter our country. And it complements those sanctions by reaching out to the Iranian people, facilitating democracy assistance, and developing a comprehensive strategy to promote Internet freedom and access to information inside of Iran. These sanctions will help deter the threat Iran poses to U.S. national security because of its suspected nuclear weapons program, and will have an impact on Iran's ability to the Revolutionary Guard and its intelligence arm to carry out another plot like the one we have uncovered. What have we learned in the last 24 hours? We have learned that the Iranian regime is a growing threat not only to its neighbors, not only to the region, but to the world, and potentially to our own homeland. We've learned that it is in the interest of the world to apply maximum pressure to the Iranian regime. We have learned that we must tighten the screws on the Iranian regime to genuinely advance the cause of stability and peace in the Middle East and clearly around the world. These sanctions are an essential means to that end. We need the ban on trade with Iran to be strong, significant, and as humanly possible airtight. A ban that does not have Americans subsidizing the very regime that seeks to harm us by purchasing gasoline and diesel that are made of Iranian crude. Iran's actions have made it a rogue nation that must be dealt with in the strongest terms. We cannot wait for another plot like this to be uncovered. We cannot take the chance that the next one will not be uncovered. Passing the new sanctions I have proposed with, as I said, 76 of our colleagues here is a start, and we cannot, as a nation, falter. The time to act is now. Now, I applaud the White House for its quick action this week in imposing new sanctions against the people responsible for the planned attack on the Saudi ambassador and other targets in Washington. I appreciate the administration's effort to implement and multilateralize sanctions on Iran. This administration has done more to isolate Iran than any prior administration, Republican or Democratic, including their quick response this week designating individuals involved in the plot, as well as today's sanction of Iran's Mahan Air. The news this week, however, has confirmed our worst fears, that Iran will not hesitate to advance its interests regardless of the political costs. Iran, given its history of exporting terrorism against coalition forces in Iraq, in places like Argentina and Lebanon, in its continued drive to advance its nuclear weapons program, despite being slowed by U.S. and international sanctions, clearly, with the alleged plot uncovered this week, remains undeterred. It is time to take the next steps to isolate Iran politically and financially. Mr. President, we must enact sanctions now to exert the unyielding pressure of the United States government against the Iranian regime and to bring to bear the condemnation of the international community so that the regime fully understands that the world will not tolerate such actions if carried out. These sanctions will prevent us from having to face that situation in the future. They are in our national security interests. They are in the interest of Iran's neighbors, in the interest of the region, and they are in the interest of the security of every nation that wishes to secure in its borders its safe from the terrorist acts of a rogue state. That is what is at stake. That is why I look forward to a hearing that we will be having tomorrow in the Banking Committee on the effect of the sanctions legislation we already have. I believe that hearing will deduce testimony that clearly shows that because of the sanctions legislation that we already passed in the Congress, signed by the President, that in fact we have made a significant dent in Iran's commercial activities, but it has not ceased or desisted from its march to nuclear weaponry. And obviously, by this latest plot, it has not ceased or desisted from its willingness, even on U.S. soil, to carry out such an assassination. Therefore, Mr. President, the time to act is now. With that, Mr. President, yield the floor and observe the absence of quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Mr. President.
The senator from West Virginia.
Mr. President, only a few people in your lifetime stand out as people...
The Senate is in a quorum call.
You need to dispense the quorum call.
Without objection. Senator from Virginia.
Mr. President, only a few people in your lifetime stand out as people of the highest caliber. People who truly care about making the world a better place, not only for the present generation, but also for the next generation and many generations to come. My dear friend, Mike Pushkar, was one of those rare people. My wife, Gail, and I consider ourselves extremely lucky to have even known a man of his caliber, let alone be dear friends with him for many, many years. Mike passed away on Friday after a long battle against cancer. I first met Mike in the early 1980s before the start of a football game in the then gravel parking lot at the WVU Stadium, a place that we both truly love. The generator in his motorhome wasn't working, and luckily the generator in my brother's RV that I was using did work. So Mike plugged into RV that day, and we have been plugged in ever since. Mike was a man whose friendship was unconditional. It wasn't about whether you lined up exactly with his beliefs, but he supported you as a person. Mike dedicated his life to help others and to make a real lasting impact in West Virginia. He had a tremendous heart and a strong sense of giving. Mike truly epitomized the word friend at every level. We can see Mike's handprint everywhere, at West Virginia University, at Milan Park, and in charitable organizations throughout West Virginia that serve those in need. Mike loved to build things, whether it was his company or the waterfront in Morgantown. He gave the largest gift in the history of West Virginia University because he truly believed in making our state, our schools, and our hospitals the best in the country. In fact, that gravel parking lot where we first met at the WVU Stadium is now the site of the Milan tailgate tent. But the thing that Mike was most proud of building was when he helped people build their own lives. And those people who know Mike know exactly what I'm talking about. Mike was a pioneer who started Milan Pharmaceuticals to give people access to affordable quality medicine. Milan is a homegrown West Virginia company that he started with his Army buddy, Don Panos, in 1961. He led Milan until 2002, and Milan has continued to grow and has now become the third largest generic and specialty pharmaceutical manufacturer in the world. There are so few people like Mike whose legacy will echo for generations to come. On Thursday, his friends and family will gather together to pay the last tribute to his legacy when he is laid to rest in Morgantown, West Virginia, a town that he loved and gave so much to improve. Tomorrow and every day, our thoughts and prayers will go out to the entire Pushkar family, Mike's friends and colleagues, and everyone whose life he touched, as all of them mourn the loss of this great man. While every one of us is truly going to miss Mike, he truly will never leave us. We all have beautiful memories of Mike that will last a lifetime, and his legacy to West Virginia and its people will remain in our hearts forever. Thank you, Mr. President, and I notice the absence of a quorum. Oh, I'm sorry.
Mr. President.
The senator from Illinois.
Mr. President, I'd like to speak as if in morning business.
The senator is recognized.
Mr. President, I rise in support of 3 free trade agreements with Colombia and Panama and South Korea that will be before us shortly here in the Senate. Few states need these agreements more than the state of Illinois. This week I released a report on the state of Illinois debt. We now have the worst credit rating in America. Our state has fallen to 47th for a healthy business climate, with only half of the state's pension and health care promises actually funded. Instead of continuing our state's debt spiral, these agreements will help the bottom line of Illinois exporting employers that hopefully will create thousands of new jobs without adding to the borrowing of our state or any new taxes. Now, since 1997,
Illinois exports to Colombia have increased by 164%, and exports to Panama increased 196%. Collectively, the three nations represent more than $1 billion worth of Illinois export sales in 2010. We will see the benefits of these agreements across a wide spectrum of jobs, from high-tech companies to manufacturers to farmers. Illinois-based Caterpillar in Peoria, which in 2010 exported $13 billion worth of products to other countries, will see tariffs reduced on hundreds of thousands of dollars of goods reduced through these free trade agreements. The Panama Canal expansion project alone represents a $300 million opportunity for Caterpillar. The trade deals are particularly important for Illinois-based Navistar, which has one of the best-named truck brands in Colombia and Panama. Illinois agriculture also reaps a windfall from the pending free trade agreements. Trade deals are expected to create about $2.5 billion in new agricultural exports and over 22,000 jobs nationwide. Expanding export markets for Illinois farmers and the increased demand for agricultural products and equipment manufacturing in Illinois will allow employers like ADM in Decatur, John Deere in Moline, and as I mentioned, Caterpillar in Peoria, to reinvest in their companies and to hire more citizens of our state. Illinois farmers and ranchers are expected to see about $90 million in increased direct exports as a result of the Senate's approval of these trade deals. Mr. President, these deals represent the direction that the Senate should take overall on job creation. No tax increase, no borrowing, but opening up new markets for American-made products. I think next the Congress should build on this bipartisan, job-creating vote and move to reduce regulatory burdens on small businesses and reform the tax code so that U.S. businesses can better compete globally. And with that, Mr. President, I yield the floor.
I would suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Votes are expected tonight here in the Senate on the trade agreements with Colombia, Panama, and South Korea. A short time ago, all three of the agreements were approved by the House. The Obama administration says the three deals will boost U.S. exports by $13 billion a year, and that just the agreement with South Korea will support 70,000 American jobs. The South Korean president is in Washington to give final approval of the deal. President Lee Myung-bak will address a joint session of Congress tomorrow. That's happening at 4 p.m. Eastern, live on C-SPAN. And tomorrow night, live coverage of the White House State Dinner for President Myung-bak, including guest arrivals and toasts. That'll be live on C-SPAN 3 and cspan.org starting at 6:30 p.m. Eastern. The Senate is planning to vote this evening on 3 trade deals, Colombia, Panama, and South Korea, after the House a short time approved all 3 of the deals. A story in the Associated Press focuses on Panama. Panama is a country of less than 4 million, and it still carries a lot of economic weight because of the Panama Canal. The U.S. last year exported $6 billion worth of goods to Panama and has minimal imports from that country. But the trade deal will make it easier for U.S. companies to compete for contracts in Panama's $5.25 billion expansion of the Panama Canal, that in the Associated Press. We're going to go now to Senate Democrats from today, speaking after their party lunches about the trade deals.
I know you all will be terribly disappointed, but I'm not going to give a speech today. Questions?
Which portions are going to move forward first?
I've had a number of meetings today. We're working very closely with the White House and my caucus, and until we have a direction from my caucus, we're not really able to make a decision. But, you know, this week is pretty well lined out as to what we're going to do. We're going to finish the work on the trade bills today. Tomorrow we're going to believe, I think McConnell would affirm this, that we'll be able to move to the appropriation bills that we have, do some more judges, and the next week do the appropriation stuff. Every week we're going to be focusing on jobs. Next week I'm not positive at this time what piece of the President's bill we're going to do. Yes, what we're going to do, a lot of procedural talk that you probably don't care about, but we have 3 bills: Ag, Transportation, Commerce, State Justice. There'll be one vehicle. We're going to set them up so that they're divisible, that people can understand what amendment they want to offer to what part of the bill. And it's important that we move these appropriation bills. I don't do this rarely, but I think here I can speak for Senator McConnell. It's important we do appropriation bills. There's work we should do, we need to do. And we're going to do that because, you know, the next work period we have the CR we have to worry about again. And what my goal is to get as many of these appropriation bills done as we can before we leave here this year. Pardon me? By the end of next week? Yes, we're going to finish the appropriation bill before we leave for the recess. Otherwise, you've heard that before, but we'll finish one which consists of 3 bills. With the tax that the vast majority of the American people support, that is, taxing just a little bit. People are making more than $1 million a year.
So each one will have Senator Reid, why go with a minibus rather than an omnibus? Why the president?
Well, I think that it's important that we see if we can do our work here. The individual appropriation bills is what we've been doing for centuries. We should continue doing that.
In normal times.
Did you miss my speech? Did you miss my speech? I had it here.
It was the best speech you've given.
I've had others tell me that.
But in normal times, each one of these bills would take a week or longer to do.
No, not necessarily. We have finished, in the past, we finished a number of these very difficult bills. When Bennett Johnson was chairing the Energy and Water Subcommittee, a very important committee, we did that in a couple of days, lots of times.
Okay, but they would take days or weeks. Are you working with Leader? Are you working with Leader McConnell?
I really do believe that that's recent history. In years past, we've done appropriation bills expeditiously.
What thinking have you heard from colleagues, particularly Republican colleagues, in the wake of the rules change from last week?
So, of course, it wasn't the rules change. As you know, we changed the precedent. In effect, what we did is say that when cloture's invoked, the debate's over.
I'm wondering about the fallout of deciding to change the precedent as you did. What have you heard from colleagues about whether that will affect ability to negotiate, relationships, the way the Senate operates. Do you hear any concerns from colleagues about a result of that?
Well, my caucus supports totally what I've done. And if you look at the press that's developed since then, it's been very positive. Editorials around the country supporting this, and private conversations with my Republican colleagues. They thought, in fact, one of the leading Republicans is quoted in, I think, is a Congressional Daily yesterday, saying he thought it was cathartic, and a number have said the same thing. Now, that doesn't, I don't mean to imply in any way that the Republican caucus was grateful for what I did, but I think it has been, as one Republican senator said, very cathartic. As a result of that, as you know, we're going to have a joint caucus in the near future, and so I think it is not only good for the Senate being the Senate, that is, the rules have been in effect here for a long, long time. Well, last time was 1979 when the filibuster rule was changed. As those of us who traveled last election cycle, the number one issue as we traveled around the country for all the things we do, how are you going to stop these filibusters? And one of the things we did last Thursday is to saying there will still be filibusters, but when cloture is invoked, it's over.
Senator, what's to stop the Congressman changing the rules by
Any questions over there?
majority? Senator, I just have a scheduling question. When do you expect the votes on the free trade agreements?
Tonight. We have 12 hours. I expect us to finish around 7 or 8 o'clock, but it could be a lot later than that if everyone wants to use their full allotted time. Thanks, everybody. Yeah, we're working on other packages, yes. Question of appropriations. Well, we don't have it done yet. We're going to do that quickly. We have a number of different packages. We've passed one. If we're fortunate enough to pass these 3, it'll mean we've done 4 of them. Yeah. Well, you should ask him, but I'm pretty sure that's true.